What's up YouTube, this is Demkeys back again with another Unity tutorial, and this is going to be a tutorial on the input manager. The input manager allows you to set up virtual axes and buttons that can be used later within your game. You might have noticed me using input.getAxis horizontal. You're going to learn exactly how that works now. Alright, now before we begin, I need you to change your editor's layout a little bit. First of all, in case you are using some other layout, just click layout over here and select default. Now stretch your inspector panel this much and right click, no, don't right click. Click on this small arrow over here, click add tab and click inspector. Alright, now click edit, project settings, input, and this right here is your input manager. Alright, now click this lock icon that you see over here. Click it only on this tab, not on this one. What this is going to do is it's basically going to lock the panel, and so if you happen to select any other object, only this inspector is going to display that object, not that object's properties, not this one. Alright, next hit Ctrl S because we need to save the scene, and now we can begin. This right here is the input manager, and this list over here is a list of axes and buttons. Each and every one of them is completely customizable. Also, you can increase the number of axes to your preference, and you can change their names as well. So let's change this back to 18 because we don't really need all that many for this project, and expand horizontal. Horizontal, just like the others, is an axis, and we're going to take a look at some of its properties. First of all, you have name. Name is basically the name that's going to show up over here, and the name by which you're going to use this axis if you were to use it in your code. You must have noticed me using input.getAxis horizontal. I use horizontal because it actually says horizontal over here. If I were to keep the name, for example, test, then I would call test from the script. Let's change this back to horizontal. Next, you have descriptive name and descriptive negative name. Before we look at that, let's take a look at these two. Okay, so this is an axis that can have a value anywhere between -1 and +1 if depending upon which button is being pressed. If no button is being pressed, the value is going to be 0. So in this case, the negative button is left and the positive button is right. Left and right basically means the left and right arrow keys. And you have alternate negative button and alternate positive button. They are basically alternate versions of these two buttons. So if you're pressing the left arrow key, then the axis value is going to gradually move from 0 towards -1. It's not going to directly jump. It's going to move gradually, and that is because it's the negative button. If you press right, which is the positive button, then it's going to gradually increase towards +1, and the same thing is going to happen with A and D, since they are basically alternate versions of these two buttons. Now let's take a look at descriptive name and descriptive negative name. Add some text over here. For example, this is positive and this is negative. Now click File and click Build and Run. This is why I was telling you to save the scene earlier. Click Add Current so that our current scene gets added, and now Build and Run. Unity is going to ask you to save the executable file, so do that. Alright, so this is the configuration window. You're going to see this before your game actually runs. It has two tabs, the graphics tab and the input tab. So within the input tab, you have all of the axes and buttons that have been defined in your input manager. These two names right here are exactly what descriptive name and descriptive negative name are used for. So click quit and let's move on. Gravity and sensitivity. Before we look at this, let's first write a script that will actually use this axis. Before that, drag your game tab. Close this. Drag your game tab and place it here because we won't really be needing the game tab. Now create an empty game object, call it scripts, create a script. Let's call it input. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it input manager and open this up in MonoDevelop. Alright, so create a public float variable called h_axis. We are making it a public float so that we can actually see the value in our inspector panel. Now type h_axis equals input.getAxis. This is how you use this is how you actually use the axis. Now this is different from getAxis raw. I'll show you getAxis raw shortly. For now, let's take a look at getAxis. Hit save and go back to Unity. Drag your input manager script into the scripts object and select the scripts object. Okay, now hit play. Now press A or the left arrow key. As you can see, the value moves from 0 towards -1. Now press the right arrow key or D. As you can see, the value moves gradually from 0 towards +1. Alright, now keep the game running and change sensitivity to 1. Now click in the game view and press A or D. You'll notice that the speed at which the value moves from 0 to -1 or +1 has actually decreased. So it takes more time to get there. This is what sensitivity does. And gravity is the speed at which the value returns from either -1 or +1 towards neutral. So change this to 1 as well and click back in the game view. Now once you get to +1 and you let go of the key, it actually takes time to get back to 0. And the same goes for A or the left arrow key. So that's gravity and sensitivity. We'll take a look at dead zones when we get into joysticks. By the way, I should have mentioned this earlier. In this tutorial, we are going to be looking at keyboard, mouse, and generic joystick inputs. I mentioned the word generic because we won't be covering Xbox 360 controllers. That is a slightly more complicated topic, and so I'm going to leave that for another tutorial. Next, you have snap. Okay, so now you can stop playing the game and go back to the script. Change getAxis to getAxis raw and hit save. Now what this does is it's going to give you a definite value, either +1 or -1 or 0, nothing in between. Play the game. As you can see, there's nothing in between. Now since snap is enabled, when you press A and D together or the left and right arrow keys together, the value that returns is neutral. That is the use of snap. It basically returns neutral if both the positive and negative buttons are being pressed together. Next you have invert. Check this and click back in the game view. Now when you press A, rather than -1, you'll get a value of +1. So it basically inverts the axis. When you press D, you get -1 instead of +1. Alright, so now you can stop playing the game. Next you have type. This basically gives you 3 options: key or mouse button, which is what we are on right now. This basically means that we are using a key or mouse button. Then you have mouse movement. In the case of mouse movement, you're going to have the x-axis, which is moving the mouse left and right, and you have the y-axis, which is moving the mouse up and down, and then you have third axis, which is the scroll wheel. Next you have joystick axis. We'll take a look at joystick axis later when we are using the generic joysticks. Axis only matters if you are using mouse movement or joystick axis. It does not matter in the case of key or mouse button, as far as I've seen. And of course joystick number, it only matters in the case of joysticks. Alright, now if you're wondering what are your options when it comes to entering names over here, I'm going to provide a link in the description. This is a link to the input manager's documentation on the Unity website. There you'll see a few examples of what keys can be used. If you want to use alphabets like A, B, etc., you enter them just as they are. Numbers also 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., as they are. The number pad on the right side of your keyboard, those numbers have to be entered within square brackets. If you are actually trying to use those numbers, then those numbers have to be entered within square brackets. You have the arrow keys, which of course you know, left, right, up, down. You have modifier keys, keys like right shift, right control, left control, alt, right alt, left alt. So those are entered like this. Left shift, right control, and so on. You have mouse buttons, which would be mouse 0, I believe that's the left mouse button, and you have mouse 1. Let's try these two out. Play the game. Oh, before that, change type to key or mouse button. Now play the game, and within the game view, press your left mouse button, press your right mouse button. You can see the values changing. You have mouse 2 as well. I believe that is for pressing your scroll wheel, or if you do have a third mouse button. You can also enter joystick buttons. I'll get into that once we start using the generic joystick. You have special keys like backspace, tab, etc. Their names are entered as they are. If you want to use the function keys like F1, F2, F3, you enter their names as so. Okay, so change these two back to left and right. Oh, sorry. Keep in mind, if you enter a name that is not recognized by the input manager, for example ASDF, it's not going to accept. Alright, now so far we have used horizontal as an axis, but we are not limited to using it as an axis alone. We can actually use it as a button. Go back to monodevelop, create a public bool variable, call it h_button, and within the update function type h_button equals input dot get key, no sorry, get button horizontal. Hit save and go back to Unity. So the get button function is going to return true if the key is currently being pressed, and will return false if it is not being pressed. So the checkbox should be checked if it is being pressed. Play the game and press A. As you can see, the checkbox is checked. Now release A and press D. As you can see, it is being checked. This is useful if you want to have it's not necessary to have negative and positive buttons. You can have just a negative or just a positive. For example, if I erase both the names and just keep positive button as space, in fact no alternates either, and then play the game. When I press space, it is still checked. However, at this point, if I try to use it as an axis, I cannot really go towards -1 because this is a positive button, so it's only going to go towards +1. Okay, so now change these back to what they were. Alright, now an axis has a value between -1 and +1, and its neutral position is 0. This is the case for joystick input and keyboard input. Mouse movement, however, is basically how much the mouse has moved since the last frame. This means it can be larger than 1 or smaller than -1. Let's take an example. So we have changed this type to mouse movement, so the keys are no longer going to work. And of course we are tracking movement on the x-axis. So play the game and pay attention to h-axis over here. As you move the mouse, the value changes, and the value is never the same. It's always different depending upon how much your mouse has moved since the last frame. And of course once you stop moving, it goes back to 0. You can track movement along the y-axis as well. You have to click back in your game view, and then you can track the movement. I can't show you the scroll wheel movement because I'm using a laptop, and my laptop mouse doesn't have a scroll wheel. So that's it about mouse movement. Now let's take a look at joystick axis. Before we get into this, the joysticks that I'm using, what I'm calling generic joysticks, are these. Not exactly this company and not exactly this product, but the exact same design. There are two joysticks that are connected together. They have only one USB cable. What you do is you plug it into your system, go to the control panel and type joystick, and under device and printers you should see the option set up USB game controllers. I'm using Windows 7 on this machine, so if you are using Windows 8, then the method to find your game controllers might be a little different, but it won't be all that much different. Now, although I've only connected one USB cable to the laptop, two gamepads are showing up over here. That's because there are actually two joysticks. And you can see its properties, each joystick's properties. I believe what I've selected right now is the first joystick. No, it's I think the second one. Let me select this one. Okay, so this is where you can test out your joystick. What you have here is the left analog sticks control. Here is the right analog sticks control. Oh, sorry. Make sure you have the analog button pressed. This is the right analog sticks control. Then, of course, you have your buttons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 5, 6, 7, 8 is the L1, R1, L2, and R2. And then you have select, start, and left analog press, right analog press. This right here is your D-pad. So if you actually do have doubts as to which button is what, then you can always come over here and find out. I have already used this joystick on this machine, but if you are connecting the joysticks for the first time, you're probably going to need to calibrate it. Maybe not, I don't know. If you do need to calibrate it, you can go to settings, click calibrate, and just follow the instructions. Okay, so now we can get back to Unity. Alright, so first of all, to use the joystick axis, you have to have joystick axis selected. And this is only for axes, not for buttons. If you want buttons, then you still need to use a key or mouse button. Alright, so we have joystick axis selected here, and we have the x-axis, which is basically the left analog sticks, left and right movement. That's the x-axis. Before you play the game, you need to change a few properties. Set gravity to 1, set sensitivity to 1, set dead zone to 0.3. Go back to go back to monodevelop and change get access raw to just get access. Now hit save, go back to Unity and play the game. Now as you can see, based on the movement of my joystick, the movement of my left analog stick, the value is changing accordingly. So I can actually stop it somewhere in between. Okay, before we move any further, I should have mentioned this before. If you don't have generic joysticks, then you probably won't be able to practice what I'm showing you further on from this point. If you want to buy generic joysticks, you can get them at your local computer hardware store. They're not expensive at all. Just get a nice cheap pair. Even a single joystick will do. You can get cheap ones for anywhere between $10 and $20. Alright, so let's continue. As you can see, the value changes based on how much I move my analog stick. Alright, so what is the dead zone? Now let's say your joystick has become really old and the analog stick on it is a little loose. What's going to happen is it's going to start sending in false input. So basically if you're not really moving the analog stick, it's still going to be sending in input. And if that analog stick if that analog stick's movement kind of depends upon your character's movement, then your character might be moving automatically, for example. So you don't want false input going in. That is why you provide a small window over here, say 0.3, maybe 0.2, so that if the analog stick is actually loose, it's not going to start registering. It's basically going to start registering the value after 0.3, not before that. You can try experimenting with this. Let's say you set it to 0.8 and then click in the game view and then move your joystick, but keep your eye on H axis. See when exactly does the value change. This is something you're going to have to experiment with on your own, because obviously you can't really see me moving the analog stick. But yeah, you get what dead zones are. The gravity and sensitivity works the same way for joysticks as it does for keys. You have snap, invert, same thing. If you select invert and click in the game view, it's going to give you inverted. It's going to give you an inverted axis. Okay, we can also use the y-axis of the analog stick, and of course you can use the right analog stick, so you would set it to third axis. The third axis in my case is the y-axis of the right analog stick, and the fourth axis would be the x-axis of the right analog stick. I believe the D-pads can also be used as axes. It's one of these two of these axes over here. One would be the x-axis and one would be the y-axis. Now let's take a look at buttons. Oh, wait, before that. Joystick number. This is so that you can set up different axes for different joysticks. In this case, joystick 1. Let's try it. I'm going to change this to x-axis and I've set it to joystick 1. It works. If I set it to joystick 2 and set this to x-axis, wait, before going any further, in fact, stop playing the game and see here where it says horizontal, just change this name to horizontal 1, because both the axes have the same name and so both the settings are going to be applied. Here it says get motion from all joysticks, and here it says just get it from joystick 1, so it's going to get motion from all joysticks. So just change this to horizontal 1, and now change this to joystick 1, make sure the axis is x-axis, and now you can play the game. It's getting input from the first joystick. Now when I select joystick 2, it's not getting any input. I have to move the analog stick on the second joystick to actually get input from it. As I said before, for using the joystick buttons, you have to set it to key or mouse button, and in that case the axis and joystick number would not really matter. Say you set this to, leave this empty and set this to joystick button 1. I think it should be joystick button 0. I'm not sure. Wait. Yeah, it should be 0. As you can see, it shows I'm pressing joystick button 1. You can set a negative button and alternate negative, alternate positive. Just like keys, you can set up joystick buttons. Alright, now joystick number is useful when you are talking about axes, not when you're talking about buttons. When you're talking about buttons, you have to mention the joystick number. So in this case, it would be joystick 1. Let's play the game and see if it works. It works. Now if I change this to joystick 2, joystick 2 button 1, then it doesn't work. I have to go to joystick 2 and press what is considered as button 1. Just like keys, for joystick buttons as well, you can use get axis or get button. Alright, so now that we have understood how the input manager works, let's try and use one of these axes. Since some of you might not be having joysticks, I'm going to stick with keyboard input. But those of you that have joysticks, you now know how you can set up joystick input, so do that if you want. I'm going to change this back to left and right and expand the game view a little bit. Add a quad. It's going to appear in the center of your camera. If it doesn't, you can just place it properly, move it around. Okay. Now, drag the input manager into the quad. And you can delete the scripts object. Now, with the quad selected, click on the inspector and scroll down so you can see your input manager script. Now let's make some changes to this script. Transform.translate, new vector 3, h underscore axis on x and 0 on y and 0 on z. Let's multiply this by time dot delta time. Save, go back to Unity, hit play. As you can see, the cube is moving. It's not moving very fast because I did not set a speed variable. Just multiply h-axis value with move force, and here in the inspector set the value to 10, and now play the game. As you can see, it's working. We are using the horizontal axis from the input manager. Alright, so now let's set up our own axis. Well, in this case it's going to be a button, but yeah, let's set up our own just so you can see how it's done. Change 18 to 19, or whatever the number is in your case, just add one more and look at the very last one. Let's call this jumping. Yeah, let's call it jumping, because there's already an axis, in fact two, called jump. There's no need for descriptive name or descriptive negative name or even a negative button. We need a positive button, which will be space, and the gravity should be 1000, dead zone not required here, sensitivity 1000, that's fine, snap, not required. Key or mouse button, make sure that's selected. Axis, not required. Joystick number, not required. Go to your scene and create another quad, or just duplicate the one that you have currently and stretch it to make it a ground object, sort of a ground object. Go in your inspector with the quad selected, remove the mesh collider from it and add a box collider 2D component. Do the same for your other quad. Okay. Oh, also in this quad, wait, let's change this name to ground. Okay, so now select quad, hit Ctrl Shift A for add component, and attach a rigid body 2D component to this quad. Okay. Now go back to MonoDevelop and create a public float variable called jump force and write an if condition checking if input.getButton down. Not input.getButton or getButton up, it has to be getButton down because we need to know exactly when the button has been pressed. And then just enter jumping and then type get component rigid body 2D dot add force dot add force vector 2 dot up multiplied by jump force. Okay, now save the script. By the way, just like get button down also returns a boolean, so it's going to return true if the key has been pressed. They're not the same thing though, just so you know. They both have their own uses. Alright, now before playing the game, set jump force value to say 500 and now play the game. As you can see, our new button works. Alright, so this is how you use the input manager.
I hope this tutorial was helpful. Do check out these other videos as well. The video on the top left teaches you how to create a 2D Mario style enemy patrol. The video on the top right teaches you how to create a parallax scrolling background. And in the bottom left is the Make a 2D Platformer game series playlist. I'm also accepting donations, so if you would like to help me out, you can send your donations to my PayPal email address, which is mentioned on the screen and in the description down below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Leave your comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.
This is what they saying. What? How you feel, huh? This is what they saying. What? Yo, started out with nothing, then I turned myself to something. Everybody wanna claim a nigga when you hear you buzzing. Don't nobody wanna claim you when they hear you bugging. Not known to tell stories, not known for fronting.